Welcome back, everyone, to the Boilermaker Breakdown podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Woody, joined today by my co-host, Joey. Joey, how you doing?
Doing good. Little laptop issue earlier in the week messed up the preview and the preview schedule from you, Ethan. But we're back now. You kind of fist fought with Best Buy for a little while.
It was a week, man. It was crazy. I was working on Monday, and when your screen freezes and all these like colored pixels pop up, and then you can hear like a sound from the laptop, and you go, "I'm sure it's fine," but then it won't turn on.
Yeah,
Anyway, I paid for overnight shipping on a laptop that never came, and then I had to go to Best Buy yesterday to buy a laptop that I don't like and will be returning tomorrow, and have since ordered a different one. So I'm using this one now, but I'm leaving it on my desk and I'm not touching it. I don't want anything to happen to it. Uh, if anything happens to it and I don't get my money back, I'm going to be even more upset than I already am. So let's record a podcast.
yeah, I don't blame you. At least you had a better Purdue showing this week than this weekend to kind of get
I
you
was
through the rough couple days without a functional laptop and.
Oh man, Monday night seeing my Grizzlies get waxed by the Warriors didn't help my mood, but we got the win over the Suns last night. The very injured Suns, but it's okay. All right, so speaking of sort of the basketball universe at large, today we're going to be deviating a little bit away from Purdue only content to give Purdue fans a little bit more context for this upcoming college basketball season. Purdue is the preseason number one team in the AP poll. Seems like 4 out of every 5 analysts had them listed at number one, at least before exhibition season started. But there are a lot of other very talented teams and players in this league, and we're going to be talking about some of them today. So Joey and I have both prepared top 16 rankings, which we'll be revealing counting down 16 to 1, as well as first and second team All-American lists. And at the end, we'll collaborate on a list of the 5 best players Purdue specifically will face this year, both in and out of the Big Ten. Sound good?
Yeah, I think it's always a good thing. Now that Purdue is projected to be one of those national competitors, it's good to know who they'll be competing against. So we compiled our top 16. I thought that was a fun number to cut off at. Considering that's the list of protected seeds, which Purdue will be working towards all year, getting one of those top 4 seeds in each regional. Ideally, the number 1 overall seed. Let's go St. Louis, Chicago, Indy. That sounds good to me. So yeah, with that, I'll let you start the rankings, Ethan. I'll let you go first.
All right, so starting at 16, we'll go 16 through 13, and then we'll kind of discuss these teams, and then I'll have you do the same. We'll kind of work our way through that. Will be how this goes. So at 16, I have Alabama. At 15, I have Illinois. 14, Arkansas, and maybe the biggest hot take / stand on business team in my top 16. And number 13, I have San Diego State.
Wow, that's not a team I have. That's not really a team I considered. Who was you mind running through that real quick? One more. You had Alabama,
Alabama,
UCLA,
Illinois, Arkansas, and San Diego State.
awesome. Yeah, so I would tell you that I'm a little higher on Illinois. I think I'm really starting to buy them, especially over UCLA. But yeah, I'm pretty similar. San Diego State's the big one for me that I think is really out there. I want to hear more.
I am a big buyer in this team. I think last season was not a typical San Diego State season. Let me pull up, I should have done this before because I knew you were going to ask about them. Let me pull up their roster. I love Magungwath, their center. He is this sort of, I think he is what people want Kentucky's Jaden Quaintance to be, if we're being totally honest. Like, he's this rim protector with size, super mobile. He can the floor a little bit, get downhill. He's a plus rebounder, I think even more so than Quaintance is. Bird on the wing for them, their guard, one of the best point of attack defenders in the country this year, I think. Offense is usually a bit more of a struggle for San Diego State teams. But Miles Bird. I am a big buyer in this offense. I think they have just the guys. I think they have the horses this year that they haven't in the past. The shooting should be good on this team. I think, Guath and Bird are all defense type of players, and this is going to be a really gritty, tough team. And in the Mountain West, that I think is probably not going to be quite as good this year as they usually are. There's usually a Mountain West team that gets a higher seed than we usually expect. And San Diego State has kind of been that team in recent seasons. They were a 5 seed just a couple years ago, I think a 4 seed one year. So yeah, I'm buying this team. I kind of wanted to go a little bit off the beaten path with one of these picks and kind of pick someone since we're going protected seeds, sort of as the outline for this exercise. I wanted to pick a team that I thought had a ceiling that I liked. That was maybe not just like a fifth place Power Five team. And I think San Diego State's that team.
Yeah, it should definitely be one of Brian Dutcher's better shooting teams, I think, this year. And I kind of agree with you on Guath. I really like Guath. I'm a little bit lower on acquaintance than most people nationally. Not to say anything about Kentucky because I'm still very high on them.
Absolutely.
But I think there's a reason that you saw so many of these rumors of kind of Guath to Kentucky when he was in the portal this year, ultimately returned back to San Diego State. But he was one of the most coveted transfers early in the cycle this year. And there's really good reasons for that. He's one of the best, if not the best, rim protector in the country. I think he's super athletic and mobile for his size. And he's kind of this unique player in the Mountain West that I think is going to cause teams a lot of problems.
Yeah, I don't have him on my All American teams. Not to spoil, but if I was doing a third team All American, he would have been on there. I think he's that good. And with that, I'll pass over to you. We'll talk about Alabama, Illinois, and Arkansas as well. I'm sure those are three teams you have on your top 16, but it hit me 16 to 13.
Yeah, I started off with UCLA, then I had Alabama at 15, I had Texas Tech at 14, and I had Illinois at 13. I think Illinois ultimately ends up being higher than 13. I struggled with, kind of ranking them on paper ahead of a couple of the teams in front of them, but I do think that if I had to bet by the end of the year, I think Illinois will end up firmly in the top 10. I think this Illinois team is awesome. I have really, really come around on this Illinois team, I think, more so than I thought I would. David Mirkovich has been kind of a revelation for this team. All of the reports from Illinois insiders coming out of this offseason was that it was Hum Redhouse at the 4. And, kind of the thought process was, well, he's improved, but, even if he has improved, what Ben Hummerkow showed last year was not really a major threat at the 4 to the point that I think Illinois kind of needed a little bit. And with the emergence of Mirkovich through their first couple of scrimmages, he's been fantastic. And it's not just kind of like the rebounding toughness that I thought would be there, for sure. I thought that was the floor. There's this level of skill there that's in creativity and playmaking ability from the 4 that's so unique. And all of a sudden, it turns that front court into one of the more unique and skilled and matchup problem front courts in the entire country, in my opinion. Having to guard a 4 and a 5 as big and as physical and as skilled as David Mirkovich and Tomislav Ivisic is going to stink. I mean, that's going to be awful. And so I think they're kind of my dark horse in the Big Ten. I'm really starting to buy them over UCLA, who is everyone's third team in my, kind of the consensus third team going into this year. And that's kind of my team that I'm really, really high on this year.
I also have Illinois ahead of UCLA. UCLA was not in my top 6. I had Illinois at 13, at 15. I agree. I think the third best team in the Big Ten. I would have had UCLA at 17 if we were going any further. So they're right around this range as well. But I agree. I think Mirkovich looks fantastic, and the way that he and Tom Ivisic are going to play next to each other is going to be a nightmare. They can both space the floor. Mirkovich can put the ball on the deck. They're both plus rebounders, right? Mirkovich is a little bit more of a driver. He's better around the rim than I think on offense than Ivisic is, but Tom Ivisic is a good rim protector. So yeah, I think those guys are going to be a nightmare for opposing offenses. I have some questions about their guard depth a little bit, which is why they're a little bit lower for me than for you. But I agree. I think 15 might be too low for Illinois. I think this is a team that could find their way further up the rankings. Let's talk about another team that we both have in our range, and that's Alabama. I have Alabama at 16. You believe you have them at 15?
Yes, I do. I think the entire reasoning for this ranking is just kind of my belief in LeBaron Philon this year. I really like what he showed last year. I think him coming back was probably the right decision, and I think he's probably ends up being a first round pick, probably a top 20 pick if I had to guess. I think he's going to be awesome. I think he's going to really shoulder the load for this Alabama team. I don't really think there's a high ceiling. They're one of the teams that I could see dropping, actually. I think they're really limited in the front court, and that's really what I'm concerned about. Early returns on Noah Williamson, the transfer from Bucknell, I don't believe have been fantastic. And so I'm a little concerned about that team and that team in the front court, especially in the SEC, where you're talking about like having to see Kentucky or Florida teams with great front courts. It's going to be a tough ask to go beat those teams. I think that's the team I could see sliding, but LeBaron Philon's just too good to keep Alabama off this list.
I completely agree. LeBaron Philon is the reason I have them here at 16. All right. I'll deal with that in a second. Yeah, I think LeBaron Philon is the the reason I have them at 16. I question the depth on this team behind them, behind Philon. Like, I don't know how many other pieces they have. They're dealing with some injuries. Williamson has kind of not been what they expected. I think they kind of wanted him to be the next Grant Nelson, and he just hasn't been. But yeah, man, I mean, Philon is that good. I think the SEC is not as deep this year as it was last year, and that kind of leaves the door open for a team like an Alabama, like a Tennessee, maybe an Auburn to kind of win more games than they would have in last year's SEC. Because outside of Florida and Kentucky, I think two teams both you and I have much higher on this list. I don't know how many like surefire like top 16 teams there are in this league. Maybe none. And it kind of depends. Like, I think people kind of view Tennessee, Auburn, Alabama very similarly. Of those, I think Alabama is the best one. I think they have the best player in LeBaron Philon of any of those teams. But yeah, I think that's why I have Alabama here. So you had Texas Tech at 14.
I did.
I have them a little bit higher, so we'll talk about them in a minute. Do you have Arkansas in your top 16?
I do. I also have Arkansas a little bit higher, so we will get to them as well.
Then let's touch very briefly on the last team in this range we haven't talked about yet, and that is UCLA. Like I said, they're outside my top 16. They're right at 16 for you, so go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah, this is another team that very similar to Alabama. Alabama, I have a few questions with. But Donovan Dent rocks. I'll kind of stand on that a little bit. I'll kind of spoil this. He wasn't on either of my first two All-American teams, but he would definitely be on my third team if we did three teams. He very, very talented guard. He causes a lot of matchup problems with just the ability to get downhill and get to the rim. Puts essentially your entire team in foul trouble in games because he's so hard to keep out of the paint and away from the rim. And you couple that with, I think, a great fit next to him and Sky Clark. I really, really believe in that pairing. I think Trent Perry is going to take a step on the wing for that team. And then I'm a big believer in Eric Daly and Tyler Bilodeau as well. I think I have a lot of questions with UCLA's depth, and that's why I'm kind of leaning Illinois over UCLA to get kind of a Big Ten skew here. Illinois over UCLA as that third team is I believe in 6 Illinois guys, and I believe in 5 UCLA guys, 4.5 maybe. Jury's still out on Trent Perry for me, but I think the 4.5 to 5 I really do believe in are a really, really, really talented group, and we'll see what like a guy like Xavier Booker does with a change of scenery. I'm not personally buying that fit between him and Mick Cronin, but we'll certainly see about that. I have some questions about UCLA, but that was similar to Alabama. That was another situation where Donovan Dent's just too good to leave UCLA off this list.
Yeah, I see the thing with Donovan Dent. I think he and Bilodeau form one of the best 1-2 combos in the Big Ten, right? I mean, I think everyone would agree that Braden Smith and Trey Coppin-Wren is kind of like that elite number, but then you're looking at maybe number two is Denton Bilodeau. You could make an argument for Shellstad and Biddle at Oregon, or pick two of the Michigan and Illinois guys for that. But yeah, I can see it. So give me your 12 through 9, and we'll go from there.
All right, so my 12 is St. John's. It's a team I'm a little bit lower on than a lot of national people. Then I'll go Arkansas at 11, Florida at 10, and Arizona at 9. Kind of a really hot takey, little
Ooh,
unique, kind of fun group of four there for me.
interesting. Okay. Yeah, we're gonna have some interesting conversations, you and I, in this range. So at 12, I have Kansas. At 11, I have Texas Tech. At 10, I have Arizona, and at 9, I have UConn. Now, I believe we both named a team in this range that we don't have on each other's list. So I'm going to guess that Kansas is not in your top 16, and St. John's is not in my top 16. So talk to me about St. John's. They've made a lot of headlines this summer for the wrong reasons after making a lot of headlines this spring for the right reasons. Why are you maybe more skeptical of St. John's compared to like the preseason rankings that have them at number 5? And maybe why do you believe in them a little bit more than me?
Yeah, I think the talent on this team is worthy of a top 5 to 10 team. I think if you purely looked individually, just ranking players and said who has the most talented guys on the floor, St. John's oftentimes has quite a few good players on the floor with a lot of big name, big recruiting pedigrees, guys like Joe Sansanon, uh, oh, I'm blanking, Ian Jackson, guys like that are just really high level players, even a Bryce Hopkins, who's supposed to be a high level transfer from Providence. I really question the fit. I question the shooting. And I think that's why I don't want to buy this team as a top 5 team. I think there's a lot of offensive problems. There's not really a point guard on this team. Like it's supposed to be Dylan Darling, and I don't know if I'm supposed to feel great about that, but I don't. And so that's kind of why I'm out on them a little bit compared to nationally. But I think at the end of the day, this is a Rick Pitino coach team. There's a lot of size and athleticism on the wing, which is always a good thing in a Rick Pitino system. There's still going to be problem defensively. I think, even though he's got kind of these 5-star name guys, I think it's Rick Pitino. They're going to play hard. They're going to play defense. It's going to suck to score on them. You're just not going to do it very often. And I think Zuby Ejiofor is a really good big in the middle. And they'll kind of just figure it out with the talent. Rick Pitino's too good of a coach. There's too much talent there. There's too much versatility there to let the point guard situation hold them back. I think they'll find their way onto, like, I think they'll stay on this list. And I think they're worthy of being a top 16 team, especially in a Big East that I think is terrible outside of them and UConn.
Yeah, that's the one thing with St. John's. I think if I was ranking teams like most likely to stay in this range, I think I'd have St. John's higher, just because the Big East is so bad this year. They're going to rack up so many wins. If you're ranking the 16 best teams in the country, I don't think they belong in this list. And talent wise, they're a top 5 team. I think that's why they were ranked there by the AP voters. But I mean, this is a team that has no point guard, and it's built up of talented guys who washed out of other programs. And as good as Rick Pitino is as a coach, there's an argument he's the coach alive and still working in the sport right now. He's struggled with St. John's teams in the past. 2 years ago, his team missed the tournament. Last year, they were a great regular season team that flamed out pretty spectacularly in the tournament. And I think last year's team was better than this year's team, even if the individual pieces on the roster are better this year. Zuby Ejiofor probably would have been on my third team All-American list if we were going third team, which based on how much we're referencing it, maybe we should have. And Ian Jackson, I'm not a believer in. Like you said, Dylan Darling, not a believer in. I think there's questions in the backcourt. I think this front court is going to be pretty good between, Ejiofor, Bryce Hopkins, um, who Dylan Hunter is he on this team? Who's
Oh,
the
I believe it's what's his name
Dylan
from
Mitchell.
Dylan Mitchell from Cincinnati and Texas. Super
Yeah.
athlete who never really put it together at those two spots.
Yeah, like I think that's a pretty good big three in the front court. I have a lot more questions in the back court. I think defensively, this team has some questions compared to last year. I don't think like Ian Jackson and Dylan Darling are good defenders, and those guys are projected to play big roles. So yeah, I probably would have had them like 18 or 19 if we were expanding out this list. Like I'm not totally out on St. John's, but for this exercise, I didn't have them in my top 16.
Yeah, I think that front court figures it out, and I think the front court's better than last year. I think Jackson fits the RJ Luis role a little bit better than RJ Luis did. Like, I think that is kind of the thought process and going out and getting Jackson and bringing him in. I know he did the whole like tweeted out Ian Jackson's like the next great New York point guard or whatever. I don't believe any of that. I think Rick Pitino is too smart of a basketball mind to see Ian Jackson play at North Carolina and be like, "Ooh, point guard, he's mine." I think he
Right.
said Ian Jackson, this is a guy who's wired to do what we needed RJ Luis to do last year and what he ultimately couldn't do in a high leverage spot. And that's why we went home in the second round. And I think that's why they brought in uh, Ian Jackson. If they do figure out the point guard thing, I think this team reminds me a lot of last year's team. And I don't think that's a great thing for like Final Four national title implications. But as far as winning a lot of basketball games, I think that interests me, especially in a Big East. And I think they'll win like 16 games in the Big East just by like walking in the door to the arenas. Because respectfully, like the Butlers and the DePauls and the Xaviers of the world, I don't think are really going to give this St. John's team a lot of trouble just because there's so much talent there. I mean, you're really looking at games against UConn and a Creighton team that got Fran McCaffrey fired last year. So we'll see what the Big East looks like. I think I've made it pretty clear my thoughts on that, but I think St. John's overall is talented enough to be on here. I did want to get into the Arkansas talk though pretty soon because I know you had them a little lower than I did.
Did have them a little. I had them at 14. Where'd you have them?
I had them up at 11.
Okay, so not too far off. Pretty similar disparity to where we have Texas Tech. So let's talk about Arkansas first. Talk to me about the Razorbacks.
Yeah, John Calipari did it again. He's got an awesome group in the backcourt. And I think if he goes all in on the freshman backcourt pairing of Darius Acuff and Malik Thomas, this team feels like those kind of old school John Calipari Kentucky teams with like, John Wall, Devin Booker, like that, the NBA guards, the superstar NBA guards that John Calipari was known for at the peak of his career at Kentucky. Vintage Calipari here. And, I think they've got a lot of pieces around him. Bring a guy back like Carter Knox and Trevon Brazile, I think has done a lot of good things for Arkansas. I think he's made it pretty clear, the issues were other players on that Must team and not Trevon Brazile. And I think he's established himself as a really good player. But I'm all in on these two guards. Malik Thomas and Darius Acuff are going to be so fun.
Yeah, the two guards are great. I think what makes me buy into this Arkansas team, and I know I had them at 14, but I'm still a believer in this team. I think the veteran guys they brought back, guys who like Trevon Brazile, Purdue fans will be familiar with him from that exhibition game a couple years ago where he just absolutely torched us. One of the most talented players in the country, even though he hasn't really put it together for a full season in his career to this point. And on this team, he doesn't need to be the guy. He can pick his spots and find his role as the super athletic sort of jumbo forward plus rebounder, shot maker. I like the return of Carter Knox. Acuff and Thomas in the backcourt are just, I mean, top 5 backcourt in the sport. Like, especially those two guys. Like, if you're picking two guys out of the backcourt, like, how many more are you taking over them? You're talking probably Florida, Purdue.
And like, if you're picking two guys out, honestly, if you're only taking two guys out, I'm not sure there's another backcourt duo I would take over these two, Darius Acuff and Malik Thomas. I I wouldn't take Florida's backcourt over those two. I think Arkansas upgraded going from Boogie Flan to Darius Acuff at point guard, and I think Malik Thomas is going to end up being better than Xavier Lee this year. I my drawbacks to Arkansas, I think, are depth, kind of, especially in the front court, and we'll see like how they handle really dominant front courts like a Florida or Kentucky in the SEC. But those guards, I think, are good enough to win them a lot of games on their own.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about Texas Tech. I have them at 11. Where'd you have them?
I had them at 14. So we essentially just kind of swapped Arkansas and Texas Tech.
Absolutely
I'll
did.
let you're a little higher on Texas Tech, so I'll let you lead the charge on this one.
Yeah, Texas Tech. I mean, JT Toppin, second best player in college basketball. Like, would it surprise anyone if he won National Player of the Year this year? Absolutely not. I mean, he's that good. And Christian Anderson in the backcourt. I mean, we were talking in the Big Ten, like 1-2 duos. I mean, Christian Anderson, JT Toppin is what 5% worse than Braden Smith, Trey Kaufman, Ren. Like,
Is it? I mean, is it
absolutely.
even that much worse than Braden Smith and Trey Kaufman ran?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically just Texas version of them, Texas Tech
Right.
version of them. Yeah, and Christian Anderson was tearing it up for Team Germany in the U19 events over the summer. I think he's poised for a huge breakout. Lawan Watts, I think, is going to be a good player. I think his fit next to Toppin is still a little bit of a question mark. But if you're looking for some of these other teams, like an Arkansas, like a Kansas, which we'll talk about in a minute, like and even in Alabama, that just kind of look like have two guys and are kind of looking for a third. I like Watts a lot better than some of these other third options. Now, the depth around those guys is going to be a bit of a question mark, but Texas Tech was a top 8 team last year. It's basically the same question. It's just different pieces involved, right? You had Darion Williams, who's now at NC State, and JT Toppin, and then kind of a bunch of good, not great kind of role pieces around them.
I do want to stick up for Elijah Hawkins here. He was a good player. He was a very good point
He
guard.
was he
I
was
I
very very
think,
good. Yes,
and I think he
I'm
was
not trying
pretty
to.
instrumental. Sorry, I'm an Elijah Hawkins guy. I wanted
I
to
am too. I didn't
I
mean to
wanted to
like
stand for my guy
take
a little
take
bit.
some shots at Elijah Hawkins. I just don't think the drop off from last year's team to this year's team is nearly as big as people are saying. And I obviously have them ranked lower now than they finished last season. So I do think they did get a little bit worse, losing guys like Hawkins and obviously Darion Williams is a big hit. But I think Anderson is ready to go into like superstar guard territory, right? If it weren't for Darren Peterson, I think there is an argument that Christian Anderson is the best guard in the Big 12. And I think JT Thomas is just that good. Like I said, I like Lawan Watts as a third option. If you're asking him to be a second option, I think that's where you start to really ask him questions. But third option, Lawan Watts, I'm a believer in. I just think this team has a high floor and a pretty loaded Big 12 that, yeah, has four teams in my top 16. Um, so,
Yeah, I'm kind of not quite as high on Texas Tech as you are. I think I kind of hinted at that with you know standing up for Elijah Hawkins when you mentioned that you didn't think the drop off was as big. I do. I think it's big because of Elijah Hawkins. I think when you looked at it, I think you're going to see a big drop off between Darion Williams and Lawan Watts. As good as I think Watts will be in that third option role, Darion Williams is a fantastic player and was one of the best transfers in the country that I don't think got talked about enough or was wanted enough, in my opinion, by schools. He ended up at NC State, which I'm sure threw a massive bag on him. But I'm surprised that like the Kentuckys of the world weren't calling for Darion Williams. And I think that losing Elijah Hawkins is going to be a little bit of a big deal. I know Christian Anderson is ready to take that superstar jump, and I believe that. And JT Toppin is a fantastic center, probably the second best player in the country, as you said. But I think outside of those two, and then the third option, Lawan Watts, I think this team feels very Purdue-like from last year. I think they've got three guys that I really believe in to play their roles, and I don't know if I really trust anyone else in the role that they're going to be in. I don't think that they have the same stylistic issues that Purdue had last year because of a slightly different team build, but I don't trust anyone they're going to play next to Christian Anderson in the backcourt. I don't think they have anyone to back up Watts and Toppin in the front court that's going to do a lot of things that kind of move the needle for them. And that's why I'm a little bit lower on them. I think there's a world they fall out of the top 16. I think this is a team that I think for as talented as their top pieces are, feels very, very Purdue-esque from last year in the sense that it's three guys who are good enough to be national title contenders and a supporting cast that's not good enough to be that Final Four national title level team.
So one team we haven't discussed yet that I have on my list that seems you do not is Kansas. I have them at 12, and this is Darren Peterson. This ranking is because of Darren Peterson. I think he's that good. I think this is like a Cade Cunningham, Oklahoma State kind of thing where the roster around him might be a little bit underwhelming, but he is going to have every opportunity to win National Player of the Year this year. A lot like Cooper Flag last year, kind of beating out Janai Broom. I think there could be a similar conversation between Peterson and either Braden Smith or JT Toppin, whoever kind of proves to be the best sort of veteran college player in the conversation. Peterson is phenomenal as a lead guard. I like Flory Bidunga quite a bit as sort of his running mate there. It gets a little bit gross after that. I think this team is deep in the sense that there's not a huge drop off between like their third and eighth guys. So like when the bench comes in, I don't think you're going to see Kansas get smoked the way you will like when some of these other teams do. I just don't think they have a good third option. I think clearly the third best player on this team is Trey White, and I don't think that's a good thing, which is why this is not a top 10 team. I think if they had a better third option, this would probably be a top 8 team for me. I do question like week in, week out, night in, night out, in the grind of the Big 12, which I think is the best conference in college basketball this year. Are they going to be able to consistently stack with against the top teams? Like Darren Peterson's going to destroy a team like UCF, right? He's going to run wild over Arizona State. Can he lead Kansas to wins against Texas Tech? Can he lead them to wins against Houston and BYU? That remains to be seen. But I think the floor of this Kansas team, because of the two-man game with Peterson and Bidunga, is just so damn high that I don't see them any lower than 12.
Yeah, I really love what this Kansas team brings between those two. I think they have an awesome kind of 1-2 punch. This team feels a little like NBA style to me almost, where it's like you've got your two superstars you're building around in this like rim protecting, athletic, kind of modern big in Flory Bidunga, and then this elite, incredible, do everything 6'5" point guard that is good enough to win you games single-handedly. And then, fill in with a bunch of, athletic, interchangeable, versatile, skilled role players around him. And I think that's where you kind of see that third option question as to like, who's it going to be? And I think the good thing for Kansas is that there's like 3 or 4 different guys that I could see it being on any given night. I think Melvin Council's good enough to be that guy. I think Cole Rosario's good enough to be that guy. I think Jaden, is it Jaden Dawson? Is he the transfer from Loyola?
It sounds, I believe.
I believe his name is Jaden Dawson. I think he's good enough to be that guy. I just kind of buy this Kansas team after seeing it happen in the exhibitions. I can see the vision in a way I wasn't really sure I could beforehand. They were just outside the top 16 for me, but they were one of those teams that was firmly in consideration that I think, if we ranked it out to 25 would have been inside my top 20.
Yeah, I think of all the teams we've listed so far, we kind of talked about how Illinois could rise. I think Arkansas could rise for me. Kansas team that like ranking right now, I'm like, I feel like I probably still have them too low.
Yeah, I think that as you talked about, Peterson's good enough to just tear up the UCFs of the Big 12. But I think that when you see them go up against the top end talent, the BYUs, the Arizonas, the Texas Techs, I even think he's good enough to beat Texas Tech almost single-handedly, but I'm a little lower on Texas Tech. I think you see his ceiling capped a little bit in the Big 12 with as much talent as there is in the Big 12. But I think the floor is there is what I'm trying to get at, is that with Peterson and Flory Bidunga, you have this pairing that's just going to dominate any lower tier competition. Even teams that are like in the 30 to 40 range, I think you'll see Peterson just destroy because they won't have anything for him.
Speaking of Arizona, I believe you had them in this range.
I did. So do you have them higher than I do?
I have them at 10.
Okay. Yes, I have Arizona at 9.
Okay, so I think that's the last team in this range to talk about because I listed UConn at 9, you listed Florida at 10, and we'll talk about those guys in a minute. Let's talk about Arizona for a minute first. I think this team is one of the more under the radar teams that no one's talking about, and they definitely should be.
I agree. This is my dark horse in the Big 12 team. As much of a dark horse as they can be. I really, really buy this team build, and I love the freshman talent they've brought in. I think Koa Pete is a phenomenal player, and he's the type of player I could see coming back for another year at Arizona. It would not shock me if Koa Pete came to Arizona and said, hey, I'm projected to be a fringe first round guy. What do you have money wise? Would you take me back if I came back? Would you feature me next year? Then he comes back next year and is like one of the best players in the country. I don't think that means anything though for this year because I think he's going to be incredible. I think it says more about his archetype. Him and Braden Burries is an awesome combo. I buy everything about this Arizona team. I love the youth. I love the mix of youth and veterans. I think Tommy Lloyd is too good of a coach to not get it done eventually. I think this might be the year he gets over the hump, gets to the Final Four. I love this Arizona team. I can't say enough about this Arizona team.
Absolutely. I love this team too. I mean, Jaden Bradley, maybe one of the most underrated point guards in the country. Between Tobe Awaka and Mo Krivas, they have one of the best front courts in the country. Obviously, Koa Pete, the least talked about. I mean, all he's done throughout his high school career is outproduce the guys ranked higher than him at every stop, right? And this team is just loaded, backcourt, wing, front court. It's very balanced. The one reason why they're a little bit lower for me, I don't know if they have the top end takeover talent that the teams ahead of them on my top 10 do, which I assume is probably a similar reason why you have them at 9. But this team, kind of like Kansas for me, is a team that, like, if we get to March and they're a top 5 team, it would not shock me at all.
Yeah, I think kind of making like predictions to look ahead. I'll probably ask you this to close out the top 16, but this is one of those teams that I'm penciling in for like my 5 or 6 favorites for the Final Four when we get to March. I love this team build. I think they're so versatile in what they can do. They can throw so many different lineup combinations at you. And like as you said, Koa Pete, a guy who's just not talked about enough. Not enough at all.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about how he just has done nothing but outproduce guys ranked ahead of him. Even this summer when he played on Team USA with AJ DeBansa and Michael Brown Jr. and even Mrez Johnson, like all we're talking about is, oh, Michael looks awesome. Oh, AJ's doing all this. Koa Pete was that team's best player, in my opinion, throughout that tournament. And it didn't get tight. It was just, oh, well, it's not the flashiest. He's not like doing anything that crazy. And it's like, well, yeah, he's just good at basketball and he's showing it. He's just really, really, really good at basketball. And I think that's going to hold true this year.
Absolutely. I'd like to apologize to all our viewers for all the yawning I'm doing right now. I was up till 3 a.m. last night catching up on work I couldn't do. Laptop was out of commission. We're powering through because we got to deliver these rankings to the people. It's what they're here for, and it's what we're going to keep doing. So, with that, let's move on 8 through 5. And you start us off with number 8.
Yeah, I'll start us off with Michael Brown Jr.'s own, the Louisville Cardinals. And then we're going to go to Michigan, UConn at 6, and BYU up there at 5.
Okay. This is going to be a really interesting conversation. I also have Louisville at 8. I have BYU at 7, Michigan at 6, and Kentucky at 5. So nice and easy. Let's start with Louisville. We both have them at number 8. What do you like about this Louisville team? And what has you? I mean, we've just spent the last 20 minutes talking, Arizona and Kansas and Arkansas. We have Louisville ranked ahead of all of them. Both of us do. So what is it about this Louisville team that makes us feel like that?
This Louisville team might have the most depth at guard of any team in the country. I think the Bluegrass State, and we'll get to Kentucky in a little bit, has no shortage of guard talent there at all. Michael Brown Jr., I think, is fantastic. This is kind of the ACC version of St. John's for me, but just like flipped. Like they have their guard situation completely figured out. It's going to be awesome. The front court looks a little scary right now to me, but I think teams that have really good point guards and really good guards in general and have iffy front courts oftentimes overperform compared to teams that have really, really good front courts and no point guard. And that's kind of why I'm buying like Louisville compared to St. John's. It's not my favorite team. I think they're going to struggle when they go up against a lot of the better front courts in the country, but the guards are good enough to win a lot of games. Having a starting lineup of Michael Brown Jr., Isaac McNeely, and Ryan Conwell is just like, what do you do with that? Like, how do you guard that?
Insane.
Now the answer is just force them to any functional big because Louisville's front court's not going to do anything. But I think Cason Pryor is the one guy in the front court. I guess before I shit on their front court too much, Cason Pryor is the one guy I think that if he comes back to what he was pre-injury, I think there's a world where that front court's actually pretty solid. But he's the major swing piece there, and you know I think that group will be good enough to justify their top 10 ranking, especially in an ACC that very similar to the Big East. I think stinks, especially outside of them and Duke. I'm not really buying North Carolina this year. I'm not a huge fan of the Virginia experiment that they got going on. So we'll see what happens in the ACC, but I think they'll just win a lot of games because they're guards.
I'm with you on that. I think Louisville's guards, I mean, if you're talking just top to bottom guard depth, I think pretty clearly the best in the country this year. And that will win you games. Like the kind of the difference, like you said, with St. John's is that, St. John's front court is solid and figured out. Louisville's back court is solid and figured out. They have questions on the opposite. If you had to pick, you would pick the backcourt every time. That's going to win you more basketball games in college. And unless you have like a truly transcendent Zach Edey type in the front court, it's always going to be more valuable to have those players in the backcourt. And I think Louisville has options in the front court. They're unproven. They have guys they can go to and try. I also just think Conwell, Brown, McNeely, elite. Like, just the top end talent there is better than anything St. John's has anywhere on their roster. If we're like comparing those two teams, and just in general, those are going to win. Those guys are going to win Louisville so many games. It's a bit of a down ACC, which I guess we're saying for like the fifth year in a row. So I don't know how much more we can say. It's down ACC. It's kind of just the ACC at this point. But outside of Duke, which I think everyone pretty clearly has as the best team in this conference, there's a lot of question marks. I would put Louisville in that tier with Duke. I think they're clearly the second best team in the conference, but very clearly the second best team in the conference. And they'll kind of run through the ACC. They'll pick up a lot of wins, a little bit like we are talking about with UConn and St. John's in the Big East. I don't think it's quite to that level, right? Like the likes of North Carolina and NC State and Virginia are going to be able to put up more of a fight than the lesser teams in the Big East. But Duke and Louisville should kind of run through this conference, and that's going to result in a lot of wins. And guards win in March. Would it surprise anyone if Michael Brown Jr. just absolutely goes scorched earth on en route to a Final Four? I don't think anyone would be.
Yeah, I agree. Kind of moving forward on the theme of teams that we're very aligned on. I had Michigan 7, you had Michigan 6. You're very, very slightly higher on Michigan, but I would say we're about the same. I think the front court for me is as solidified as it can be, but let's talk about the back court a little bit. Let's kind of look at why this team might slide if they don't. What could make this Michigan team fall?
Yeah, they don't have guys in the backcourt. Let me rephrase that. They have a lot of guys. I don't know if they have a guy in the backcourt, but that might be okay. Like, the guys they had last year in, Trey Donaldson and Roddy Gale, Namari Burnett were good enough. They definitely upgraded this year, right? And I'm stalling because for the life of me, I'm blanking on the point guard's name. Elliot Cadeau. He might be the most underrated point guard in the country. I know I said that about Jaden Bradley, but Cadeau, for as much as he infuriates people who have to watch him because his style of play is a little bit erratic and he's not a good shooter or really a great scorer in general, he is one of the best pass first players in the country, right? If you're saying Braden Smith is the best, he's on the short list for number 2. And when you have the pieces around Cadeau, that really works. I mean, he was the starting point guard on a number 1 seed North Carolina team just 2 years ago. I think people forget that given how last year went for North Carolina. And I think Dusty May and Michigan have the plan in place to not ask him to do too much, right? They're going to ask him to sort of orchestrate the offense, get the ball to Yaxel Lendenborg in the front court, feed the bigs, like Mara and Merez Johnson down low, not kick out the shooters like Burnett, like Trey McKinney, like LJ Kaysen. There's talent on this team. There's guys that can step up, and there's enough backcourt depth that they don't need everyone to hit.
Yeah, I think I agree with your assessment of they have a lot of guys, not a guy in the backcourt, but luckily enough, they have the guy, the ultimate guy in the front court, and Yaxel Lindeborg, who can kind of do everything at the college level. I agree with you on Cadeau. I think he's going to be a lot better than kind of people have acted like he has been the last couple of years. People have really been down on Cadeau, and I've been one of them, but I think he's going to be a productive, solid player for Michigan. I don't believe they upgraded at the other 2 guard spots, though. And that's, I think, kind of holding me back from like having them as a top 5 team, because I think this front court is special. I think the group of 3 with Mara, Merez, and Yaxel is just such a special group. Merez is probably a little bit more established than Mara. I don't think either one is particularly established as a great Big Ten center, but Merez showed, I think, a little bit more last year. However, I think Mara ends up being an all-conference guy by the end of his year at Michigan. I think that he is so skilled at the 5. He's 7'3". He's going to provide great rim protection in that system. I really, really like Michigan. I think the 2 and the 3 maybe hold this team back just because this team badly needs shooting, especially if you're playing Cadeau at the 1, you can't play and Merez or Mara at the 5. You can't play non-shooters at the 2 and the 3. So it'll be interesting to see which one of these kind of very similar. I think a lot of them are kind of similar in what they bring guards. Burnett's obviously an elite shooter at the 3. I think he's the most steady of that group. I think I've been a big Namari Burnett guy for a while. I buy the shooting. I think Roddy Gale is probably the best of that group, though, and he has not been a fantastic shooter throughout his career, especially last year. The shooting numbers took a dip from already not great. And so I think the guards, the 2 and the 3 would be what holds this team back, but I kind of just buy this front court being physically dominant and awesome.
I completely agree. I think their front court is legit, and I think they have enough shooting in the backcourt to make up for it, right? Like, that's always going to be the question with this team is the fit really clunky with a non-shooting point guard and then 3 non-shooters in the front court that seem like they're going to be starting together, right? Lindeborg can shoot a little bit, but like he's not a guy you want shooting at volume. And, Merez and Mara just aren't shooters. Same with Cadeau. So you're starting 3/3.5, I guess, non-shooters, and then whoever's the 2, whether that's Burnett or Kaysen or McKinney, or even, they're not going to start Gale because I would give him 5 non-shooters, but like that's sort of the question there.
Man, I think they might start Gale. I will say I think Cadeau was serviceable shooting the ball last year. Not quite as good as Yaxel, but similar to Yaxel is the idea of like he can if he has to, but it's like
if those are like if you have like 3 shooters and then like a center and then one of those guys be like, okay, well, you don't have 2 not like they can't,
right,
you can't leave those guys alone. If those guys have to carry, right? If you have a lineup of Roddy Gale, Merez Johnson, and Ade Mara, and your best shooters on the floor
Are
are
Yaxel and
Elliot
Cadeau.
Cadeau and Yaxel Lindbergh, you don't have a shooter on the floor.
Yeah, very
So
true.
however they play with the rotations, they're going to have to find ways to get two of Burnett, Kaysen, and McKinney on the floor for large stretches of the game because those are the guys that can shoot on this team.
Yeah,
And
honestly, with that lineup, it might be worthwhile just have Cadeau bring the ball over half court, shoot a half quarter, and let the three front court guys just go at it for the offensive rebound.
I do think we're going to see Lundeborg and Cadeau play a lot of the off minutes, right? Play a lot rotationally opposite each other because they have very similar skill sets, just at different positions, right? They're both like great passers who are serviceable shooters, but they're not like going to be off ball demons. They're not going to be shooting pull up jumpers, or at least they shouldn't be, right? Yaxel because he can get to the rim whenever he wants to. He doesn't need to do that. And Cadeau because he just can't make them. So you're gonna have I think those guys playing opposite minutes and kind of running offense when the other one isn't. Then they're both going to start. But it's a little bit like conversations we've had with Purdue before, where it's like, oh, CJ Cox starts the game and then Jakari Harris checks in really early and plays more minutes. Like I could see something like that where you get these guys sort of rotating off. That way, when Yax is in the game, you get two of Kaysen, McKinney, Burnett on the floor with them in that front court. When Cadeau's in the floor, same deal, right? You're taking Leonard out for the bulk of those minutes. And so if Yaxel's playing 34 minutes a game and Cadeau's playing 20, maybe they're only overlapping for like 15 minutes and kind of the rest of the time they're kind of playing separately.
Yeah, I agree there. I think that's a good point. And I think Cadeau will be the one who you'll see a lot with the backup unit. And the one concern I have is we haven't really seen Yaxel be used in a lot of the Danny Wolf factions that they ran for Wolf last year that kind of made them very unique and allowed their front court piece to handle the ball. So I'm interested to see what they turn to point guard wise if they don't go to Yaxel when Cadeau is off the floor. Because, I think that would be the one drawback to playing the three bigs is if you play the three bigs together, I think you're inherently not playing Cadeau with that group. I don't think they'll start all three of them. I think you will see that lineup, but I think that lineup inherently requires Yaxel to play point guard because I think that, to go that lineup, you're going two shooters at the 2 and the 3, and you at least have the spacing from those guys, and Yaxel can handle the ball and kind of play the point guard role, and it's not a big deal. I think if you do go Yaxel and Cadeau, it doesn't even matter if you play a shooter. I think you almost have to play Burnett at the 2 with that group of 4, and even then, I don't know if that works spacing wise. I don't think it's a huge concern for me because there's just so much talent, especially in the front court, that I think they'll figure it out. And Dusty May rocks as a coach, and they've looked good, and I think visually through 2 exhibitions to the point that I'm not concerned about it whatsoever. Obviously, I have them 7th nationally. I feel like we've kind of torn down Michigan a little bit, and I want to make it known. I think this team is every bit deserving of their 7th ranking, and in fact, I think that's one of the teams that I'd be more likely to buy them finishing higher than 7th and lower.
Agreed. I have them at 6. I think that's right where they belong. And yeah, you tell me at the end of the year they're a top 5 team, totally buy it. You tell me at the end of the year they won the Big Ten, I'd be disappointed, but I wouldn't be surprised. Like this is a very, very good team.
Yeah, I think moving on, there's one team I think we need to touch on before we move into the top pod, and I believe that is UConn, unless you have not ranked BYU.
I have ranked BYU, so I have UConn at 9 and I have BYU at 7. Where do you have those 2 teams?
Okay, I have UConn at 6, BYU at 5. For some reason, I did not hear you say BYU. So
all right, so let's start with UConn. I have them at 9. You have them at 5. I don't have a problem with ranking UConn as a top 5 team at all. I have a lot more questions with them. It's an interesting debate. I think they might be the safest top 10 team in the country, given the conference they play in and the depth they have. I really don't see a world where they don't finish outside the top 10. And honestly, they might be a really safe bet for a 1 seed if they can pick up some wins in the non-con because their win total is going to be insane in the Big East.
Yeah, they're going to win 30 games this year. No problem.
No problem. As long as they
barring
don't.
barring an awful non-con.
Right. That's the thing is like if they lose like every major non-con game, then like the bracketologist people, the committee will look at that and be like, okay, like they beat up on the Big East, we'll give them a 2 seed, right?
Right.
But if they split their big games and they pick up some marquee wins and then go on to run through the Big East with like 2 losses at the end of the year, like maybe they lose on the road to Creighton and St. John's and win every other game, this is a team that's going to stay in the top 10, probably the top 5 all year. The reason I have them a little bit lower is I don't know how different this team is than last year's team. I think structure, like they've been constructed very, very similarly. And the issues last year were honestly a little bit similar to Purdue in that they had kind of 3 spots locked down and then some holes at 2 spots. Obviously, their spots were a little bit different. They also had issues at the 5, and then at point guard. Purdue's issues were not point guard. Um, I I don't know how much they upgraded those spots. Terrace Reed is better than Terrace Reed was a year ago, and I do think Rivey is better than Samson Johnson. But I don't know how much of an upgrade that is. It's a little bit like the 2 spot for Purdue, where it's like, well, CJ Cox starting again. He's a little bit better than he was last year, but it's not like we brought in some like big time transfer 2 guard. He's like taking that to like a major
Right.
strength
You're not
relative to the
bringing
rest.
in a pro.
Right. And that's, I think, the same thing for UConn. Like, I don't think the 5 will be a weakness. I don't know if it'll be a strength for them. And then if you turn to point guard, Silas Demery is better than their options last year, I think pretty clearly. I just don't know if he's the guy that people are talking about as like UConn's second or third best player. I don't know if I really buy that. And then critically, are we sure Braylon Mullins isn't just like a worse McNeely?
Are we sure Braylon Mullins isn't like just freshman Fletcher Lawyer? That was honestly that I'm from Indiana. I saw Fletcher play a lot in high school. I saw Braylon Mullins play a little bit in high school as well. I thought they were very similar players coming out of high school, and I think that their rankings spoke more about their interest received more so than it did about their playing abilities. Now, I think Fletcher was underrated, so I'm not saying I think that Mullins is like a borderline top 100 kid, but I think that the 5-star lottery pick that Mullins got for a lot of this offseason was a little bit much for me. I don't quite see that. I think he's ends up being a little bit better and a little bit more complete than freshman Fletcher Lawyer was. I think he's a little bit more ready physically, but I think they're pretty similar players. I think most of what he's going to be is an off-ball shooter this year. I don't think you can expect him to be a ton of on-ball. And as you said, like you're replacing a spot that last year's team was an 8 seed that had Liam McNeely there. I don't think there's a world where Braylon Mullins, as respectfully as I can to Braylon Mullins, I don't think there's a world where he is a better player than Liam McNeely this year. And so I think that even though you have the upgrade to Demery at the point guard spot, I agree with you on that. I don't think he's like this all-American guy that people have talked about him as. And I also have started to question the fit with him because I think Silas Demery wants to shoot. I think Silas Demery wants to score a lot. And that's part of what makes Silas Demery good players is scoring ability. But I think this team wanted Solo Ball and Alex Caravan to be the clear 2 featured players. And I'm not sure how much a team with Silas Demery at point guard allows for multiple other players to be featured if Silas Demery isn't one of that group that's featured.
I completely agree. Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think they're also dealing with injuries, right? Mullins is going to be out for a little bit, which is going to push guys like Stewart into the lineup, maybe a little bit higher. Reed as well. They're going to just play. Reed is injured as well, is what I mean. Like Terrace Reed and Braylon Mullins are both injured right now, kind of pushing some guys at the depth chart that maybe aren't quite ready for those bigger roles. This team is, I have them ranked number 9. I think they're a top 10 team. Don't get me wrong, right? And last year's team was not close to that. I question their ceiling. If you're going to ask me of everyone on this list who is least likely to make a Final Four, I would tell you it's probably Alabama. And after that, it might be UConn. Like, in March, like, this is like a second weekend team that's going to lose against some of the top teams they face once they get to the top 16, 8 best teams they face. We saw what a team led by Solo Ball and Alex Caravan was limited as last year. And you can say some of the same things about some of the other teams on this list. Don't I understand that. I just don't think they upgraded this roster as much as people think they did.
Yeah, I think last year, in my opinion, from what I saw last year, I think ultimately that core of Terrace Reed, Alex Caravan, Liam McNeely, Solo Ball was not good enough to be a Final Four caliber team. Now they were good enough to beat Final Four caliber teams in one-off games. I think that Florida game in the round of 32 is, I think, as big of an indicator as any in that. And I think that they upgraded the roster enough that this team will win probably close to 30 games this year in a very weak Big East. And they're going to beat teams less talented than them. They're going to be very well coached. I agree with you. I question the ceiling because I think, unlike Purdue last year, who was more limited by the guys they surrounded their featured players, they were limited by that. I think UConn was almost more limited by their core than as they were their role players last year. Now, I think with better role players, that core wins a lot more games, I think, and looks like this awesome regular season team that wins a bunch of games. But at the end of the day, I think when they run up against the elite teams in college basketball, that becomes apparent again, especially over a larger sample size.
I completely agree. Let's talk about BYU. You had them at 6 or 5.
I had them at 5.
I have BYU at 7. Now, I think they're very similar to Louisville and Purdue, and we'll talk about Purdue in a little bit. In this way, I think these are elite offensive teams with major questions on defense. And that is usually not a formula that does well in March because the margin for error is incredibly small. We'll talk about this with Purdue throughout the season and kind of what my concerns are with Purdue as a potential national title winner. Now that I doubt Purdue's talent or the ability to get there, but when you can't fall back on a good defense, on a foundational defense with good rebounding, then you limit yourself and you open yourself up to like an off shooting night getting you bounced early in the tournament. Or as a team that's a little bit more balanced and is going to shut the water off on other teams, even if they're not shooting well, is a little bit more reliable, right? The floor is a little bit higher. So I would put Louisville and BYU kind of in that same tier. I like BYU a little bit more. But sort of in this mid top 10 team where elite offense, high end talent all over the roster, enough questions on defense, and I think their floor is a little bit lower than the teams they have ranked ahead of them.
Yeah, so I agree with your point on the good offense, bad defense thing. I do think they're in a pretty different situation than Louisville, though, from my opinion. I think that the main issue with Louisville is that it's a team that has a very weak front court. I don't think BYU necessarily has like a positional hole the way I think Louisville kind of does in the front court. I think
Completely
BYU, even though their center spot is probably their weakest spot in their starting lineup, Keba Keita is still a fantastic starting center if you're talking fifth option. And you pair him with AJ DeBanza at the 4. Like, let's be real here. I can't come on here and say a team that starts AJ DeBanza at the 4 has a weak front court. So I think this BYU team just has so much talent. But you talked about a little bit of a lower floor because of that defense, those defensive struggles. And I do think there'll be nights where like the NBA draft talent guy like AJ DeBanza is kind of just not all the way checked into the game mentally. And the Big 12 is so deep and so talented that I think they'll pick up a few losses in the Big 12. But I think there'll be games where their talent shines through so brightly that it's like, okay, yeah, I see it, because they're starting Richie Saunders at the 3 and AJ DeBanza at the 4 and Rob Wright at the 1. And they've got all this awesome, fun talent everywhere. They're bringing back guys from a team that was really good last year. I think Kevin Young is a good coach. My biggest question with them is simply motivation this year. It's simply, is a guy like AJ DeBanza more tuned into the NBA draft next year? Is Kevin Young more concerned about recruiting and, producing NBA talent, or is this team ready to come together and win March games? And so we'll kind of see that happen. They leaned more to the NBA draft side of things when they saw Nebraska in that exhibition and lost, but again, exhibition season. I don't think it's fair to say Nebraska is going to be a better team than BYU this year. So I think, kind of we'll have to wait and see on that for me. But that's where I'm at with BYU.
Absolutely. I think, Rob Wright, Moo Davis, Richie Saunders, AJ Devonsa, Kebakeda is such an elite starting lineup, and they have depth behind them too. If they're got, it's not just like, well, it's those five, and then, well, no, it's like they have probably 8 guys that you really trust, maybe 9. Like they go deep. They have a ton of firepower. They have, I mean, arguably the 3 best players in the Big 12 on the same roster. I mean, the talent on this team is insane and unreal, and uh, it's really just a question. I still question defensively. I think they have some limitations, and like you said, a lot of young talent, a lot of NBA talent. Is that gonna sort of maintain consistency night to night? They're another team at 7 that I could easily see finishing higher than this. For much of the offseason, I had them as the 4th best team, and I dropped them a little bit, mostly because I felt like other teams needed to be above them, not because they did anything to fall down these rankings.
Agreed. I completely agree there. All right. You kind of mentioned the top 4. I'm ready to get into it.
So there are 2 teams that you and I have listed that we haven't talked about yet because they're in the others' top 4. So let's kick it off with you and go 4 through 1.
I will name mine that you've already listed, and I have not. I'll start at 4 with Kentucky. I had Duke at 3, Houston at 2, and I have Purdue at 1. No, it's probably going to be called a homer pick, but again, when making this, I wanted to stray away from completely overreacting to exhibitions, and so that's kind of why I kept my top 2 the same way it's been all off season. It's Purdue and Houston still to me. I don't want to overreact to scrimmages because I think that's that gets you into trouble when you get into some takes. We'll get to my full thoughts on both of those teams, and I don't think that they're perfect, but for now they're going to remain at my 1 and 2.
All right, so number 4, I have Florida, which is a team that's significantly lower on your rankings. We'll talk about them. Kentucky is 5 for me, so right in the same spot. Top 3. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying I have not changed this top 3 at all since exhibition season started. This is not an overreaction when I say I have Purdue at 3, Houston at 2, and Duke at 1. This is a Purdue podcast, and I don't have Purdue number 1, and they're starting the season as the AP number 1 team. So I'm not going to have an unpopular opinion here. We'll talk about this. I think all 3 of the top teams, I think, are pretty clearly the top 3 for me. And I think all 3 of them are on the short list for the Final 4 national title contenders, and I would have no problem with you ranking them in any order. We both have Houston at 2. We just flip-flopped Duke and Purdue. Let's start, though, with Florida, and then we'll talk about Kentucky and then get into the top 3. So Florida is 4 for me, and they're 10 for you. Florida is a team I was not expecting to be as high on as I am right now. Throughout most of the offseason, I had them sort of in that like 8-9 range, very similarly to where I have UConn. So like consensus wise, the top 4, they're like Purdue and Houston is the top 2, and then right behind them was like UConn and Florida, right? Sort of as the wider collective of basketball analysts are talking about this. And I kind of didn't buy UConn and Florida being that high. I'm kind of buying Florida now. I think Boogie Flan and Xavier Lee are going to be very questionable defensively, but I'm buying that pairing a lot more than I was a few months ago. I think this is a very talented group that complements each other very well. Fland being this sort of more like NBA archetype, athletic, score first guard, and Lee being a little bit more of a shooter. He can play on ball or off ball, more of a playmaker. He's an underrated rebounder. I think they complement each other really nicely. And it's not like last year's Florida backcourt that went, 3 NBA guys and Denzel Aberreen off the bench. But I think it's very talented. The Florida front court, though, we talked about Michigan maybe having the best front court in the country. I put Florida in that category as well. I mean, Thomas Haught, the 3, looks like it's going to be awesome. Janielu at the 4 next to Condon was what they were doing last year, and they won a national title with it. I think the rebounding, the defense of that front court is legit. I think they're just going to be a really tough out of the best team in the SEC.
Yeah, I think I just disagree on the backcourt. I like Boogie Fland. I think he's a good player, but I don't think I think pretty clearly Boogie Flan that we'll see this year wouldn't be the best player on last year's Florida team. I think that was pretty clearly Walter Clayton. And I think that you'd be lucky to even get like an Elijah Martin-esque season out of him. And I think he's honestly the better of the two backcourt pairings. I just am not sure Xavier Lee is ready for this kind of role at the Power 5 level. I think Florida's almost asking more of him at the SEC level than Princeton did at the Ivy level. And I think that, you know, you're replacing three NBA guards and not just three guys that like signed two ways. You're replacing a first round pick and two second round picks who all are on NBA rosters. Like Nick Richard is on the Warriors roster, and I believe getting minutes for them. Is he not? Is he? Fact check me on
Will
that.
Richard, yes. Will Richard is a part of the Warriors rotation. He's sort of near the bottom of their rotation, but he's a legit part of the Warriors rotation.
Yeah.
Walter Clayton Jr. was a first round pick. He was playing backup point guard minutes in Utah. Elijah Martin was an early second round pick for the Raptors. He's looking really good for them right now.
Yeah, like three rotation NBA guys. I think last year's front court, there were some times where there were some questions. It was a little bit up and down in that tournament run. I don't know how much you're remembering from that, but the tournament run I remembered from Florida was a front court that got outplayed at times. And when it came down to it, they had three NBA guards that they could go to with talent in the front court and Condon and Chinyelu. And the three NBA guards were good enough that they figured it out. Walter Clayton hit enough shots. He got hot enough. Elijah Martin had a great tournament. Will Richard had a great tournament. I think that this team was so special because of those three guards and to a lesser extent Denzel Aberdeen, who I also think is a better player than Xavier Lee. They don't have that this year. They don't have that depth. They don't have that top end talent. And when it all relies on this front court, yes, I think this is one of the best front courts in the country going into the year. But when it all comes down to the front court, I'm not sure the front court is good enough to make this a top 5 team by itself. And I don't think the backcourt's good enough to be a top 5 team.
I guess we'll just have to agree to disagree there.
Yeah, I think that we have a vastly different viewpoint of the backcourt, and time will tell. I think that's just one of those things. I am one of the biggest sellers of Florida. I have them top 10 because I think they deserve the national championship boost. I think Kentucky is clearly a better team at this point throughout the offseason than Florida to me. And I think that, even looking at like an Arkansas, I think I would take Arkansas right now over Florida.
Well, let's talk about that Kentucky team briefly. If you want more of our thoughts on Kentucky, you can go ahead and go back to Kentucky exhibition previews and recaps. We're going pretty long on this video, so we'll kind of skim quickly through Kentucky, but just very briefly, you have them at 4, I have them at 5. What did you like from this Kentucky team?
Yeah, so deep. There's so much talent. Denzel Aberdeen left a national championship Florida team where he was the fourth guard, and I think there's a world where he's the fourth guard again on this Kentucky team. Like, I think Jalen Lowe, who's hurt, will be back when he's healthy, and he'll start at point guard. Otega Owe is going to start at the 3. I can kind of consider him. He feels a little guard wingy, but I'm more on the guard side. I'll put him in the backcourt. And Jasper Johnson looks fantastic as well. Aberdeen,
Phenomenal.
I think, looks great. I think you've got 4 guys at least in the backcourt that you feel just over the moon about. Like, you can run those 4 out any game and you'll have a better backcourt than 99% of college basketball. And I think Mo Diabate showed a lot of good things at the 4 so far. Trent Noah is going to be a good player. I think Colin Chandler is going to be a plus for this team. I think Yelovich ends up being a plus for this team off the bench. There's just so many different things they can do. Their front court's going to be good when Quaintance is healthy again and Garrison's back there. There's like this team feels very similar to Purdue in that they have like 12 different guys that feel deserving of minutes. And I think there's multiple NBA guys on this team. And I really like what they've put together so far. We'll see how top end the talent is. I think we're still waiting to see. Like, we haven't seen Quaintance be lottery pick good at the college level, I don't think. We haven't seen Otega Owe be first round pick good at the college level. Jasper Johnson's obviously a freshman. We haven't seen him at all at the college level. But I think those are three guys that I wouldn't be shocked to hear their names called in the NBA draft next year. And I think that's bodes well for upward movement, even though we both have them top five.
Yeah, I completely agree. The deepest team in the country, easily. Like you compare them to Purdue, I think the bottom of Kentucky's roster is a lot stronger than the bottom of Purdue's roster.
Yeah, I agree. I more meant in just the idea that it's like
Yeah,
this team is just one of those that you see 12 guys on certain minutes. And I think, we talked a lot about it. We spent a lot of time gushing over that Kentucky team in the recap. I think opened us up to a Kentucky audience a little bit. But yeah, just I can't say enough good things about this Kentucky team at the moment. And we have a lot
absolutely.
more in the recap.
So let's focus on the top three. I have Duke 1, Houston 2, Purdue 3. You have Purdue 1, Houston 2, Duke 3. Let's start with Houston, the team we seem to be pretty aligned on. That number 2 there. Houston to me is a team that is maybe almost flying under the radar somehow, even though they seem to be consensus top 2, just because all the headlines are around Purdue or Kentucky, BYU, and Houston's just kind of quietly sitting there as the runner-up last year, who was one turnover away from winning a national title finally for Kelvin Sampson. And this team lost some talent, obviously, but they brought in a ton and they return a lot too.
Yeah, I really like this Houston team. I think this, in my opinion, is the lowest, or excuse me, highest floor, lowest ceiling of these three teams. I think kind of what you're getting with Houston to an extent, just because of how consistent this program's been over the last 5 years. Like you're getting a top 2 to 4 team in the country every single year. You're getting an elite perimeter defense every single year. You're getting an elite rebounding team every single year because that's what Kelvin Sampson teams do. And I love bringing Milos Uzan back. I think I would have dropped this team a little bit if Uzan ended up staying in the NBA draft. I think just honestly, I don't think that team would be a top 3 team if they didn't have Uzan. But in my eyes, Uzan is a guy who I think ends up being like a borderline first round pick at the end of the year. I think he's so good on both sides of the floor, especially what you saw like down the stretch of last season with him running the point for that Houston team. Bring back Emmanuel Sharp's big too. Bringing in talent like Chris Sinak Jr. and returning JoJo Tugler. This team's going to be so good again. It's the old saying, they don't recruit, they reload. Is that
They don't
what
rebuild, they
they don't
reload.
rebuild, they reload? Like that's Houston at this point. That's Houston under Kelvin Sampson. They're not rebuilding, they're reloading. They did it again. They reloaded. They've got a couple 5-stars coming in with Kingston Fleming as well in the backcourt. Just so much talent.
Yeah, this team is absolutely loaded. Emmanuel Sharp is phenomenal. I think he's underrated every year just because the other guards Houston has. He's a shot maker, just a big-bodied defensive dog. We know it. Uzan is obviously Purdue fans very familiar with him from last year's tournament loss, and they lost to kind of 2 pieces last year, one on the front court, one on the back court, but they're reloading with Fleming and Sinak. JoJo Tugler's back. This Houston team, like you said, the highest floor of these 3 teams, I think by pretty wide margin. Purdue, we kind of talked about the potential pitfalls of this roster construction. Duke being such a young team, you never know how that will go 100%. Houston is going to be a top 3 team all season long, and they're going to make probably another Final Four, and let's look to get over the hump this year.
Yeah, I can't say enough about this Houston team again. Like Kentucky, I love this team build. I think my main question would be if this team ends up with like the top end talent that like I think Duke and Purdue have, but there's so much pedigree there that I think that and even like a guy like Uzan could end up being a first round NBA guy that I think it ultimately ends up happening and they remain as this bona fide top 2-3 team all year. I think moving on, I think the next team we should talk about is Duke. Leave the big one for last. I'll start on Duke because I like this Duke team as much as anyone right now. I guess not quite as much as you if you have them won, but mine says more about, I didn't haven't changed mine much over the offseason. I think this Duke team can do so much, and they have so much depth on the wing. And they do have the top end talent. They have a guy who's a bona fide top 3 pick, one of the best freshmen in the country in Caden Boozer. And I'm really excited for what this Duke team can do. I think they have a lot of versatility on the wing, and I think that's what makes them the most unique team in college basketball this year.
I love this Duke team, man. I mean, I have the number one for a reason. Cam Boozer is special. I think
Cam, not Caden. I'm sorry. I got both of them. I mentioned Caden being the best freshman. Cam's the best one. Caden is the point guard.
Yeah,
So.
Cam Boozer is special, man. I think he is going to be the best freshman in the country this year, and I include Darren Peterson in that. He is going to be unreal. I love the pieces they have. I mean, they're bringing Malik Brown, maybe the best front court defender outside of JoJo Tugler in Houston, and I guess maybe Mugun Guath at San Diego State, off the bench again this year. Pat Ngongba looks really good. They have so many options on the wing between Isaiah Evans, Dame Sarr. They just got guys. Who is it? Is it Wilkerson?
Sebastian Wilkins
as well. The guys in the backcourt, we kind of know what Foster is at this point. Caden Boozer, like you said, a little bit more of a question mark, high ceiling play. I think Duke's ceiling this year is probably starting at the one, but Foster's going to be good too. This team just has so many options up and down the roster, and the high end talent. I think last year Duke was clearly the best team in the country. That sort of collapsed in the final minute against Houston and ultimately didn't win a national title, which happens. The best team in the country often doesn't win the national title. In fact, you probably have to go back to outside of UConn 2 years ago. You probably have to go back a couple of years before we found another one that was like the best team all year that also won the title. So who knows, what Duke will be this year. I don't think this Duke team is quite as good as last year's team, but I also don't think there's much of a drop off. I don't think Cam Boozer is Cooper Flagg. I think he's close. And I think this team has, Con Knipple. I don't know if there's really a equivalent to him, but I do think this Duke team has more options in the starting lineup than last year's team did. I think losing Tyrese Proctor hurts, but you get Foster back. You got all these incredible wings like Wilkins and Sarr and Evans, who was great in a limited role for Duke last year. I guess I'll just wrap it up by saying this. I think college basketball fans as a whole should be very, very glad that Cedric Coward chose to stay in the draft and not play for Duke this year. Speaking as a Grizzlies fan, he's been incredible in the NBA so far. He's one of the front runners right now. It's only been a week and a half in the league, but he's playing like one of the best rookies in the NBA right now. And imagining him and Cam Boozer on the same roster would have been like 2024 for Purdue all over again, where it really doesn't matter how good Purdue's season is because they're running into one of the best teams the last decade. Duke isn't, Sarr they got instead of Coward isn't quite that level of player, but he's very good as well. And they have the depth to kind of bring him along more slowly if he's still figuring things out. I think top to bottom is just the best roster in the league, and they have the top end young NBA talent to win it all this year.
Yeah, I think the reason I still have them at 3 behind Purdue and Houston is just like the most important position on the floor is point guard. And I think at the moment, Purdue and Houston clearly are better at that position than Duke. But Duke might be better than both of those teams at the other 4. And so I think that's, something to take note of. I think this team is very talented. I don't ultimately think they end up having 4 better players. Like, I don't think that their 2 through 5 ends up being better than Purdue's 2 through 5 and all that. But there's a world where it happens. There's so much NBA talent on this team. And there's such a matchup problem because they can go so big size-wise that teams are just going to struggle to guard them. But, after an hour and 24 minutes, I feel like we finally hit the team that most of our listener base is here for, and that's the Purdue Boilermakers. I had them 1, you had them 3. It's probably a good thing to get the perspective of someone who doesn't have them 1 going into the season on this podcast. I think it's good to hear that because it is perfectly reasonable to not have Purdue 1. I know that, some Purdue fans have acted like that a little bit. Like it's not reasonable to have Purdue at anything but 1. But I think even before, we got into like exhibition season at all, it's very fair to have Purdue not at number 1. And Ethan, as you showed, doesn't. So I think I'll let you talk about Purdue first. I think you'll have a good intro to this Purdue team and why you ranked them third instead of first.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about Purdue on this channel quite a bit. Obviously, we're a Purdue sports podcast, so we don't need to go too into like the different roster pieces and all that. I'll just kind of talk about relative to the other teams in the country. Like I said, I haven't changed since the exhibition season. This is not like an overreaction to what we've seen in Kentucky or anything like that. I obviously still have them ranked ahead of Kentucky in my rankings, so I question Purdue's defense, size, and athleticism relative to Duke and Houston. And I know Purdue fans are going to be tired of this criticism. At times I am too. It feels like every pundit that wants to downplay what Matt Painter does, what Purdue does, always goes back to, they're just not that athletic. But we saw against UConn in the national championship 2 years ago that eventually it will matter. And if I'm comparing Purdue to Duke especially, but also Houston, that's going to be a big problem. And Purdue is good enough to overcome that. This should be the best offense in the country, bar none. I think Purdue's rebounding will be better, even if Oscar Clough has struggled through 2 exhibition games. I think he will improve Purdue's rebounding. Getting Jacobson back as the backup is going to also be huge. The size and rim protection he offers when he's on the floor is going to be huge. So this team is undeniably better than last year's team with more options in the backcourt, the stronger front court. And like I said, if you want to rank them number 1 for it, I have no argument with that. The reason I have them 3 is just I think when you're talking about who was the number 1 team in the country, I have more question marks with Purdue's team as a whole than I have either Duke or Houston, which is why I have them just behind those 2. But I think those 3 are in a tier by themselves. I think they're clearly the 3 best teams in the country entering the season. As much as teams like Florida, Kentucky, Michigan, BYU might be kind of knocking on the door and could easily jump up into that tier pretty early on. I think going into the season, it's those 3. And you can put them in any order you want. Obviously have different orders. That's why I would put Purdue 3rd, though. I think of those 3 teams, they have the most question marks.
Yeah, I think you hit on all the notes. I agree. The biggest question for me is that kind of size and athleticism factor, and to a lesser extent, the top end talent factor of, does this team really have like an NBA guy that a lot of people think you really need to have to win a national championship? I'm not entirely sure there is one on this year's team, but I think Braden Smith ultimately ends up being an NBA guy. I think it's perfectly reasonable to project him as that. But we've covered a lot of Purdue before, so if you want our thoughts on the roster, be sure to check out some of those other videos. I think we're hitting the hour 30 mark. We should probably move pretty quick into All-Americans. I assume that our first team is going to be very, very similar. And if it's not, we kind of offline talked. There's really 7 guys that I wanted to hit, that we both kind of had. And we think our consensus top 10 guys in the sport. That's the 3 freshmen and Darren Peterson, Cameron Boozer, and AJ DeBanza. I was blanking on that for a second. And then you have Braden Smith, you have Trey Kaufman-Renn, you have Cameron Boozer, you have already said Boozer, you have JT Toppin, and what was the last one we said?
Yaxel Lendeborg.
Yaxel Lendeborg, yes.
At Michigan.
So my first team was Braden. My first team was Braden, Darren Peterson, Yaxel Lendeborg, Cameron Boozer, and JT Toppin. I'll let you give yours real quick. We'll kind of talk about the differences, but I think it's fair to just kind of move on from the similarities at this point with those consensus players.
Yeah, I think we have the same first team. I have Braden Smith, JT Toppin, Cam Boozer, Yaxel Lendeborg, Darren Peterson. Same first team. I don't think we need to. We've talked about all those guys as we went through our top 16, so I don't think we need to dwell on that much longer. Let's go on to the second team. I know we have 2 of the same players, at least the same players, on Trey Kaufman-Renn and AJ DeBanza. Who are the other 3 you have?
So I probably had 3 very interesting names. I had Milos Uzan, I had LeBaron Philon, and I had Otega Owe. Otega Owe, I'm going to guess.
Wow. Okay.
Did we go 10 for 10?
We have 2 of the same names in that group of 3.
Okay,
So
so
we have
I
only
do want it
one
known
difference.
that we made these lists like differently. These were not
We did
combined
not
lists. We
collab.
did not talk about this before they were made. So I'm
Wow.
guessing Owe is one of the ones. Who's the other
Yes,
one?
I
Was it
would take it
Uzan or
away.
Phylon?
I thought I was gonna be like shaking it up having LeBaron Philon on my second team All American, and then you come out here and you got him too. Man. I think okay, real quick. We said we were only going to talk about the differences. I want to talk about LeBaron Philon. I think he is who people want Tahad Pettiford to be.
I
I
agree.
think
I'm here for it. He's the Alabama guard that people need to be on. Why are we all over Tahad Pettiford? Auburn's a mess right now. LeBaron Philon is going to be the guy in the Nate Oates system, and that guy scores 20 a game every year.
Philon was the better player last year. Like, what are we doing? He the only thing Pettiford is better at than Philon is shooting from three. And Philon's still good at that.
Right.
Philon is a better driver, he's a better passer, he's a better rebounder, better facilitator, better scorer.
Better
He's just a better
defender.
world's better defender. I mean, he's an elite defender. Pettiford's a bit of a negative on that end, which is probably why he never started for Auburn, a team that was last year, a team that was really built around defense, especially in the backcourt. Yeah,
That could have used an NBA guy at the two.
really, really could have. All right. So we both have OA. We both have Philon. Uh, so you have Milos Uzan, who he would have been like the first name on my third team if we had gotten to that. Um, so I know we're running long. I want to play a little guessing game here. If you had to guess who the last guy on my list is, who would it be?
I've got two names. Is it
Hit me.
Darion Williams?
Got it in one.
He was the first name for me on team number 3. The other guy I was going to guess was Donovan Dent, but I think you hinted at it earlier when you said he wasn't. Well, you wanted to
Yeah.
talk about him before we got to the All Americans. I figured he probably wasn't on your list. Dent was the second name that I think I left off. It went Williams then Dent for me. I think there's a world Williams makes it over Trey Kaufman-Renn. I think I was actually surprisingly close. Kaufman-Renn was the 10th name I listed, and that was almost entirely because of role. I want that clear before our base attacks me for that. I still buy Trey Kaufman-Renn. He would have been a third-team All-American if he wasn't a second team. But I do think there's a world that because of role, he falls off a little bit. Every other guy on this list is, in my opinion, the first option on their team.
Yes.
And I think that when you look at it, like Uzan is going to be the first option on a Kelvin Sampson team. He's one of the best defensive point guards in the country. He's just going to get assists because he's passing to other really, really awesome players. He's a good facilitator anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I think the shooting it translates. You saw him settle in and be a 40+% 3-point shooter towards the end of last year, down like a month and a half stretched in the season. I think that's the guy you're going to get. I think he's going to be super efficient. I don't think he's going to have the high-end flashiness ceiling that like a Braden Smith has. But how much of that do you need when you're just going to get 16 and 6 with elite defense from your point guard every night?
Yeah, I completely agree. Like I said, Uzan would have been the 11th name on my list. Darion Williams, we saw what he did last year at Texas Tech. I think if he stayed at Texas Tech, we'd be talking about that team very similarly to the way we talk about Purdue this year. Of like, they brought their guys back. They brought in Lawan Watts, like top 5 team kind of preseason, and the fact that he went to NC State and wasn't able to, the Red Raiders weren't able to retain him, I think, is a big blow to that team. He's just so good, man. He's this sort of jumbo 3-4 who can is a little undersized for the 4, bit of a jumbo wing, small ball power forward who can shoot from outside. He's a great rebounder. He can drive, get to the hoop whenever he wants. He's just such a complete basketball player. There were times last year, especially in the NCAA tournament run, where he was running the Texas Tech offense, even on a team with JT Toppin and Elijah Hawkins. Toppin is one of the first team All-American almost, and Hawkins is a Braden Smith level passer. Still impressive what he was able to do for that team. And yeah, I mean, I had Kaufman-Renn as the 9th name on my list. I think he I had Debonsa, Owe, and Philon ahead of him, but I think Renn was pretty safe. Kaufman-Renn was pretty safely a second team All-American. It's just really hard to have 2 first team All-Americans, and if you're you have to like run away be the best team in the country. And even if Purdue manages to stay at number one all year, which they very well could, I think there's really a world where they're like head and shoulders above everyone else in the country throughout the entire season. And that's, I think, what it would take to get both of those guys in the first team. You're muted, real just
How's that? I believe my mic unplugged for a second. Is that a little better?
you're good.
Awesome. Yeah. I think when it comes down to it, if you're talking about like having multiple first team All-Americans, one, I don't know how much that's going to happen anymore with the transfer portal, just because like there's so many good players who are able to leave and go to the perfect situation for them to be a first team All-American now that like like, for example, a Yaxel who probably would have just gone to the NBA is now a projected first team All-American, and I think ends up being a first team All-American for TKR purely because he's going to be the first option at Michigan. And otherwise, like 10 years ago, he's in the NBA. And Trey Kaufman-Renn, obviously 10 years ago, would still be at Purdue, for 4 years because he's not the NBA type guy. But you're seeing guys come back like a LeBaron Philon. I struggled to move LeBaron Philon down the list before I do Trey Kaufman-Renn, just because I think LeBaron Philon's role is so much more cemented, especially coupled with the fact that I think what's best for Purdue would be Trey Kaufman-Renn not being like clearly one of the top 5 best players in the country, because ideally you have guys around him stepping up and he doesn't have to be that. He doesn't have to produce that much as the second option. That you have Braden as the best player in the country, and Kaufman-Renn's a third team All-American or a second team All-American, and that's great. And he's still super productive in scoring, but he doesn't have to be this dominant second option because Jakari Harris stepped up and Oscar Clough and Daniel Jacobson are producing at the 5, and Jakari Harris is producing, and Fletcher Lawyer's there. And that's the pathway to Purdue being good enough to even be deserving of 2 first-team All-Americans. And I don't think that they would be good enough if you had 2 guys to be good enough to be 2 first-team All-Americans. So that's kind of where I'm at on that. I don't think it really says much about how I view TKR individually. I think he's a fantastic player and going to have a great season in his own right. Just with how the new transfer portal rules work, I'm not sure we'll ever see another pair of first-team All-American teammates.
I'm with you on that one. And unless you have like a sort of Zion RJ Barrett type of Duke of like best team in college basketball and 2 sort of transcendent NBA talents prospects, like that is probably the path for it, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, not to go back to Cedric Coward, like if Cedric Coward and Cam Boozer were on Duke this year, like
I could see
that's the kind of pathway of like, okay, not only is Duke tearing up the country and is clearly the best team, but they have 2 like surefire lottery picks. Like that's the path, I think.
And even then, like you saw Duke have 2 surefire, had 3 top 10 picks last year, right? With Man, Con Knipple and Cooper Flagg. And Cooper Flagg was about as good as you could be as a college basketball player outside of one man we know is Zach Edey. But you you had 2 other lottery picks, and I don't think Con or Man were really even in consideration for a first team All-American nod. I think at this point with NIL and the transfer portal, I don't think I would go so far as to say I don't think we will ever see a pair of first team All-American teammates again.
It's very fair. I think if I was to expand this to third team real quick, kind of the names I'd be in consideration for, talked about Milo Zuzan at Houston, Donovan Dent at UCLA, Magoon Guath, San Diego State. I think I'd look at Michael Brown Jr. at Louisville, and then kind of take your pick of one of the Florida guys, maybe Boogie Fland or Thomas Haw would probably be the names I would push forward for that. But yeah, those are kind of the guys. Maybe one of the Arkansas guards, or that might be freshmen on the team.
I would pull for one of the Arkansas guards. I think they end up being kind of the 4th freshman. I think a UConn guy might sneak onto third team. I think they'll be good enough that just like Solo Ball or Caravan or whoever their leading scorer is going to get to 15 or 16 a game. They're going to win close to 30 games.
There's a world where like Tom Ivicic at Illinois makes third team.
Yeah, I think Mirkovic will take enough away from him that he'll struggle to make an All-American team. I do think he'll be a easy second or third team all-conference player in the Big Ten, though, I think. So kind of to tie it back to Purdue, I know I wanted to do a quick little exercise. I wanted to run through it a little bit. I had a few nominations, but wanted to talk through the top 5 players Purdue will see this season on their schedule. Kind of the big non-conference ones, I think, that I would nominate early. LeBaron Philon, I think, will be a name that we'll both probably agree upon. Doug McDaniel probably deserves a shout from Memphis. I think he's going to have a good year in Penny Hardaway's system. And then you talk about Iowa State and Auburn, Brandon, a few guys, Taman Lipsey and Joshua Jefferson, and then Tahad Pettiford with Auburn, I think, are the 5 worthy of naming in the non-conference. And when we get to conference play, I think there's a few guys who deserve some shouts. I think Axel Lindenborg deserves a shout. I think Bennett Sturts and Donovan Dent both deserve shouts, and I think John Blackwell does as well. I think that's a lot of guys. If we want to I've got a couple more Big Ten names I can mention depending on how we feel about the non-conference guys. But
So I think pretty clearly, given where they were on our All-America teams, the 2 guys that are sort of non-negotiables on this list are Axel Lindeborg and LeBaron Philon.
In that order, I think,
in
too,
in
pretty
that
clearly.
in that order. Just for the record, we're not including JT Toppin in this list because technically we're not scheduled to play Texas Tech yet. I think the far and away most likely scenario is that Purdue and Texas Tech win their first round games, play each other in the Baja Mar, and then JT Toppin becomes the best player Purdue plays all season. But given that it's not officially scheduled yet, and we want to get to some other names, we're going to be looking elsewhere. I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. I think Donovan Dent would be the 3rd name on the list for me. And then after that, I mean, there's a bunch of guys. You go through the non-con. I think Tahad Pettiford is probably the top non-con guy I would say that we haven't talked about yet. And that really depends on how he stacks up next to the likes of like a John Blackwell, a Tom Ivisic, even like a Nick Martinelli or Bruce Thornton, who are going to be more like stats first on bad teams guys. I guess we'll see about Ohio State. They're at least talented enough to be a top 16 team. Bennett starts at Iowa, like you mentioned. Even like a Tucker DeVries or a Lamar Wilkerson at Indiana, I think is worthy of mention here. And then the Oregon guys, Jackson Shellstad, Nate Biddle, maybe 2 of the most underrated players in the conference. I'd kind of cape for one of them to be in this conversation.
Yeah, so you actually did not mention I think, the guy who I would put at number 3, and that's John Blackwell, Wisconsin. I think I'm really
Okay.
excited to see what Blackwell does as he kind of takes the keys. We've seen Greg Gard wings. Greg Gard ball dominant wings have had fantastic years in the last couple of years in that system, and I think John Blackwell's next in line. I think he's going to do a lot of point guardy things. I like the fit with Nolan Winter and Nick Boyd next to him, and even Rap. I think Blackwell's in line for a big season, and I think his size at 6'5", with his athleticism and his skill handling the ball, his ability to get downhill as well as shoot the basketball, I think he's the 3rd best player Purdue will see. Tucker DeVries is another name under the radar I didn't think you were going to get to, but I wanted to at least mention. I think he's a really fantastic player. I think he's going to be Indiana's clear best player in my opinion, and that says more about, I think, how good he's going to be more than like Wilkerson really kind of being bad. I think DeVries is going to be awesome. You know, he was a potential NBA guy coming out of Drake before the injury, shooting 47% from 3 on like 9 attempts last year before he got hurt, by the way. I think that's going to be a kind of crappy matchup. But the guy I really, really, really wanted to go with is I almost said Jackson Shellstad. John Blackwell at Wisconsin is my vote for number
All right.
3.
All right. So we have Philon and Lindeborg. We have Dent and Blackwell. For the 5th guy, there's a few different ways we could go with this. Tahad Pettiford, Tom Ivisic. We talked about Tucker DeVries, Nick Martinelli, maybe like Chad Baker Mazara at USC, or honestly, given the way he looked against BYU, Rink Mast at Nebraska probably deserves a shout here. But the guy I think I want to propose as the 5th is one Heinz Steinbach at Washington.
That was the name I was just getting ready to mention. I think Steinbach is a lottery pick. I love Steinbach. Hans Steinbach is one of my I'm most excited to see him hoop guys in the Big Ten and in the country. I think he's going to be awesome. I think that's a great list of 5. And with that, that wraps up an hour and 45 minutes of national basketball talk. So
I guess
we've
this is
got,
kind of what happens when you try and cram an entire offseason of college basketball coverage into one preseason podcast.
yeah, it is. So it's a worthwhile hour and 45 minutes, I think. So I hope everyone who has made it to this point realizes how thankful we are that you just listened to an hour and 45 minutes of us talking. But yeah, we're both excited. Purdue sees Evansville in 5 days to open up the season on Tuesday, November 4th. So as always, we will be previewing and recapping that game. Looking forward to it. We will see you guys later.